and welcome back to She Investigates, the podcast where we investigate all things weird. I'm your host, Gwen Ross, and today we explore a chilling case from Tippah County, Mississippi, the murder of 36-year-old entrepreneur and father, Kirby Carpenter. But first, let's catch up. So I mentioned in my podcast episode last week that I was going to do kind of like a check-in on my New Year's resolutions. And I'm not going to talk about all of them, but just kind of check in on a couple of them. The first one is I had a resolution to start some type of collection. And recently, my brother-in-law, Brad, if you're listening, reminded me that I actually already had a collection. And it's kind of something that my family makes fun of me for. And that is water bottles. I have like a problem when it comes to water bottles. I jumped on the Stanley craze. I have 3 different Stanleys, and now I've jumped on the hydro jug train, and I have one of those. I just love water bottles, and I feel like it just like makes me, I know everybody says this, but it makes me want to drink more water when I have a cute, fun water bottle. So I guess I can check that one off as completed. I do have a collection of water bottles. I also had put on my list that I want to learn a new skill, and I haven't made any progress on that goal at all. But I do plan to pick up pickleball this summer, and I've talked my kids into learning to play with me, and we actually have some good friends that also like to play. So I'm hoping that this summer that's something that we can kind of do as a family is learn how to play pickleball. I also had said that I want to do date nights more often. And that is still not happening very often because we both have very busy schedules, and it's also just hard to get a babysitter. But what we've decided that we're going to do is our oldest is 11 now. And so I feel like he can babysit our other kids, but not for like an extended period of time. So me and my husband want to start doing like check-in walks in the summer this evening because I love going on walks in summer evenings. And we're just going to like chat, talk about our day, without having kids interrupt, because if you have children, you know it is like impossible to talk about anything important until they're in bed or you get interrupted a million times. So we're going to just start going on like 20-30 minute walks in the evenings this summer, and our oldest son is going to be able to stay with the other kids while we're gone, kind of like training for babysitting eventually when he's old enough to actually like stay with the other kids for a long period of time. But anyways, that's how my New Year's resolutions are going. The other thing that has kind of been dominating our house lately is the Stanley Cup playoffs. We are definitely Blues fans in our family. We live in Utah and we love the Utah Hockey Club. But my husband actually grew up in St. Louis, Missouri, and he has always been a big Blues fan. When I tell you that he cried when the Blues finally won the Stanley Cup, like, that's real. He is a mega fan. And so we have been watching the playoffs. They barely made the playoffs, so we weren't expecting a lot because they're playing like the best team in their division. But every time that we watch, they lose. And then when we miss games, like we missed this last Sunday's game and they won 5-1, and then we missed Thursday's game and they won 7-2. So that got us thinking, like, are we bad luck? Are we the problem? And do we like watch our team, or do we just like cheer them on without watching so that they can win? I don't know. We're going to kind of try to put it to the test. They have a couple more games, hopefully. But the series right now is tied. So they really could go on in the playoffs. I don't know. So I guess I will let you know if we are bad luck or not once we watch their upcoming games. And that's really all I have for Let's Catch Up this week. So with that, let's jump into today's case. And today's case unravels a tale of love, greed, and an alleged conspiracy involving those closest to Kirby Carpenter. But before we delve into the details of Kirby's tragic death, we're going to revisit just a really weird incident that happened years before our story happened. And I know it sounds kind of random, but I promise that it's all going to connect later on. So just stay with me. So it's 1996, and in the deer farming community of Clarion County, Pennsylvania, there was a theft. And this was not just a regular theft of like money or precious metals or anything like that. This was a prized 20-point whitetail buck that was named Goliath. And he had vanished from the Wild Bunch Ranch. Now, this particular buck, I've seen pictures of him, and he had just this crazy rack of antlers, like not like I had ever seen before. He was bred in captivity, and so he was a pretty friendly and docile deer. But the reason why he was stolen was because he was exceptionally valuable just for being a buck in general because of this crazy rack of horns. Is it horns or antlers? So just being a buck on his own, he was worth around $100,000 to $500,000. But then he was worth even more because of like sire fees and breeding rights. And that took his worth up to about $2 to $3 million. So this was a big deal that this buck was missing. And his disappearance was just a huge blow to his owner, who was Rod Miller. And this buck was missing for years. About 4 years later, Goliath was finally discovered, and he was discovered on the property of Jeffrey Spence, who had been operating the White Oak Whitetail Deer Farm in Reynoldsville, Jefferson County. There were some people that had been on a property that was next to Jeffrey Spence's farm, and they actually recognized the deer from years earlier before. Like I mentioned, this was a very distinct deer. Like, this could not just be mistaken for any other deer. He had a very distinct rack of antlers, and so they contacted the local police. Now, Jeffrey Spence, he claimed that he had purchased this deer, but DNA evidence actually confirmed the buck's identity and that it was actually the missing Goliath. And Jeffrey Spence had tranquilized this deer, cut a hole in the fence of the farm, dragged the deer out, and then took the deer to his family farm. In 2005, Spence was actually convicted of theft by unlawful taking, receiving stolen property, and conspiracy to commit theft. He was found guilty of theft by unlawful taking and receiving stolen property, and this was a third-degree felony. So he was sentenced to 90 days in jail and 7 years of probation. And despite all of the evidence against him and the conviction, Spence maintained his innocence, stating, "The bottom line is, I was not guilty then, and I am not guilty now." So this incident involving deception and high-stakes theft is going to serve as kind of a backdrop to a more sinister crime later on. Because of this incident, Jeff Spence was really well known in the area around these parts, and he was married to Karen Spence, who was also well known in the area, but she was well known for a different reason. She was well known because she was a school nurse in the area, and the two of them had a daughter named Caitlin. So jump forward to 2022, and in 2022, Caitlin was in a relationship with today's victim, Kirby Carpenter. Kirby Carpenter was more than just a name in the headlines. He was born and raised in Tupelo, Mississippi, and he was a self-made businessman who owned multiple ventures, including gold, silver, and coin exchange, and he owned 2 liquor stores in Ripley and Boonville. And because he was a dealer of these precious metals, in his home, he had a room that was just full of safes that he would keep all of his kind of like inventory in. And these safes contained gold, silver, documents, and even guns. Kirby was a Marine, and he was also a devoted father to 2 young children. He had one son named Towns, who was from a previous relationship, and then he had a new infant daughter named Enola, who was with Caitlin Spence. He was described by family and friends as being generous and hardworking, and his life seemed to be on an upward trajectory. He had recently welcomed his daughter Enola with his girlfriend Caitlin in July of 2022, and they were just kind of settling into family life in the quiet Dry Creek community. On November 30th, 2022, Kirby returned home from grocery shopping, and that was the last time that anybody saw him alive. 2 days later, on December 2nd, his body was discovered outside his home, concealed beneath a covering behind the garage. He had been shot to death with a shotgun. And despite not being found until December 2nd, it's actually believed that he was killed on November 30th. The discovery was made by Caitlin Spence, his girlfriend at the time, who made a phone call to Kirby's mother, Maddie Jones, to express her concern over his absence. This is the first kind of weird thing to me because they lived together. Like, they saw each other on an everyday basis, yet when she hadn't seen him for a couple of days, all she does is call his mom to tell him that she's worried. If I'm in this situation, I'm calling like everybody I know that my husband spends time with. I'm reporting him missing. I'm looking all over the property. And they did live on a large piece of property. It was like acres. It was like a farm property. But if she had done even like a simple search of the small areas surrounding the home, she would have stumbled upon his body a lot sooner than 2 days later. So Maddie, Kirby's mom, and her husband rushed over to the scene only to find their son's lifeless body. And the shock was immeasurable. Kirby's truck was still in the driveway, the groceries were in the car, and his phone was left untouched. The keys to his truck were missing, and no murder weapon was found anywhere as well. According to sources, Caitlin's parents had come to stay with her and Jeffrey for a few weeks following the birth of their daughter in July, which is really normal. Like, when you have a baby, family wants to come and help out and see the baby. But this visit that was supposed to be only a few weeks had turned into months, and they were still there by the time that November rolled around. According to Caitlin, they had returned home just the day before Kirby was killed on November 29th, which, how convenient. But after the shooting, they returned to Caitlin and Kirby's home in Mississippi on December 3rd. So they come back after they hear that Kirby has been found and that he's been killed. The following day, Kirby's mom, Maddie, goes back to the house. She's there because she wants to get the last will and testament and the last wishes of Kirby, which are in one of his safes. When she got to the home, Caitlin's parents told Kirby's family that she didn't want to see anybody, and they really just made them feel completely unwelcome at their own son's home. They'd even put up a cardboard sign saying, "No visitors, we are grieving," to try to discourage people from coming over. But Maddie went inside anyways, which kudos to her. She was on a mission to get these documents out of the safe that had his last will, his last wishes, and his will. And Jeff Spence did not want her to go in the safe rooms. But once again, she powered through and she got in, and she discovered when she got into the room that the codes to all of the safes had been changed. And not only that, the locks to the house had been changed as well. So within just a day, the locks have been changed to the home and to the safes. After leaving the house, Maddie noticed that Jeff's car was kind of parked at a weird angle in the garage next to Kirby's truck. So she went over to his car and she popped the trunk. I don't know why. Maybe she just had like intuition. And she found that the back of his car was loaded up with bags of Kirby's silver. And Kirby's family was not just going to let this happen. They took the bags of silver because this did not belong to Caitlin's parents. It didn't even belong to Caitlin. It belonged to Kirby's children. And they really had no claim on any of Kirby's stuff. So they started to be concerned at the possibility of theft by the Spencers, which, I mean, obviously they already found them trying to load up the car with silver. So I understand why they were worried about this. And because of that, Kirby's mom actually became the executor of his estate, which technically everything that he had belonged to his kids at this point because he wasn't married to Caitlin, wasn't married to anybody else. So everything that he had should have been inherited by his children. His sister, Casey Barnes, said, quote, "We started an immediate inventory to make sure they couldn't take things out of the home. Looking back on it, we should have kicked them out. But in our minds, we were thinking, this is the baby's home. We were so deep in our grief, we just weren't thinking," end quote. So really, nobody knows how much got taken away from the home and how much Caitlin and her parents got away with before Kirby's family stepped in. They could have taken a huge amount of money, and it is believed that they got away with quite a large sum of money before Kirby's family stepped in. And This is the reason why I told you guys about the case against Jeffrey Spence earlier about the theft of that buck. If you remember from the earlier part of our story, Jeffrey Spence has a history of taking things that just don't belong to him. Even items of great value like that deer Goliath, which was worth millions of dollars. So clearly he is not above theft. He's the kind of person that if he wants something, he uses any and all means to obtain it. And we can only assume that that's the way that his daughter Caitlin was raised, that she was raised to operate in the same way. So because of the large amounts of precious metals that were in the home, Kirby had actually had a security system set up, and his family was really anxious to check the cameras. They thought that this was going to be the smoking gun, that they were going to be able to see what happened to him. But after inspection, the sink box, which was located inside the house, it's what made the security system work, was missing. So they didn't have any type of video evidence about what had happened to him. Kirby's funeral was held on December 17th, 2022, and shortly after, Caitlin and her parents, Jeff and Karen, all returned to Virginia. They left just 3 days after the funeral. Kirby's mother, Maddie, being the executor of the estate, set up kind of like child support payments to be sent to Caitlin in Virginia for the baby each month. And after just a few months, Caitlin stopped responding to any communication from Maddie. And Maddie started getting worried, not necessarily for Caitlin, but out of concern for the baby, she called law enforcement in Virginia and wanted to have them go and do a welfare check. When the officers arrived at the address, the home had actually been burned to the ground, and all that remained was a mailbox, the mailbox where they were receiving these child support payments. So law enforcement asked around, they asked some neighbors what had happened to the house and how long it had been burned down. And the neighbors said that they were told by Jeff Spence that the family was leaving on a vacation to visit some family in Pennsylvania. Oh, and by the way, they were having electrical problems with their house right now. Why he felt like he needed to tell his neighbors that? Like, how weird and suspicious. And the very next day after they left, the house went up in flames and burned to the ground. Like, if that does not scream guilty, I don't know what does. But exactly 1 year later, on November 30th, 2023, arrests were made. Caitlin was apprehended in Pennsylvania at her grandmother's home, and that same day, her parents were arrested in Virginia. All three waived extradition to Mississippi, and they were charged with capital murder, conspiracy, and larceny. And this was actually, because it was one year exactly from the day that Kirby was killed, his family had already planned like a get-together that day to have like a moment to remember Kirby and his life. And when they got the news of the arrests, it added this element of celebration to the event because it looked like the ball of justice was finally going to get rolling. And the family actually shot off fireworks, which was one of Kirby's favorite ways to celebrate any special occasion, to celebrate this victory of sorts, that finally somebody is going to have to be accountable for this. And when it comes to the arrests, you might be thinking, wow, that escalated quickly. Like, what is the evidence that they have to finally arrest them? Like, what is the smoking gun that they finally have probable cause to arrest Caitlin and her parents? But the problem was, we didn't have the probable cause document from the courts in Mississippi. Those are only made public once somebody has been officially indicted. And because this was a capital murder case, those indictments would have to go through a grand jury. Well, the grand jury in Mississippi only convenes once or twice a year. So if you commit a crime and the grand jury has just barely had their convention, they've just convened, then you have to wait in jail all the way until they convene again if you have committed a capital offense. So they were able to hold Caitlin and her parents until the next grand jury meeting, and that's when they were officially indicted of these crimes. When they were officially indicted, they were indicted of 3 counts of larceny, which is basically just theft, and that is punishable to up to 20 years in jail. And then they were also indicted of capital murder and accused of shooting Kirby while in the process of robbery, which carries a sentence of life in prison or death. So we still don't have access to all of the evidence against Caitlin, Karen, and Jeffrey, and we probably won't until their official trials. There's a lot of stuff that they're kind of like keeping close to the vest in order to not compromise the trial, as they should. But we did get a little bit more information after these indictments, and some documents have surfaced that show that Caitlin and her parents wrote out new and updated wills and last wishes just days after Kirby's death. The timing on that feels so odd to me. Unless they were worried about like the possibility of going to jail in the future or having some type of like standoff with police or what would happen to Caitlin's children in the event that she wasn't around anymore. It was just very weird timing that they all decided days after Kirby's death to update their wills and their last wishes. Something else that was interesting that happened just a few weeks before his arrest is that a home was actually purchased by Jeff Spence in Pennsylvania, and he used cash to buy this home for $95,000. Where did he get that kind of cash? I have a guess. There's actually bank records for the Spences that show that all of the money to purchase that home was deposited in just 1 month, the month before the purchase was made. So let me just give you a little bit of perspective. These are people that have previously declared bankruptcy. They are not good with their money. They're not savers. I think that they just thought that at this point they had gotten away with stealing Kirby's fortune, and so it was safe to start depositing the funds. I mean, it had been a year at this point, so they probably were thinking, all right, we're in the clear, and just started depositing this money. This is all speculation on my part, but I believe that the funds that they got to pay cash for that house were money that they had taken from the home after Kirby's death. One last interesting bit of information is that sometime in 2023, either Caitlin or her parents were in the process of trying to obtain a passport for Enola to leave the country. And can you just imagine how disastrous that would have been if they had succeeded in fleeing the country before their arrests? What a mess that would have been. We're so lucky that they didn't succeed with leaving the country before being arrested. So the documents from the grand jury suggest that the motive was financial gain. Kirby's mother believes that Caitlin and her parents conspired to murder Kirby to access his wealth and his assets. Caitlin had actually apparently told somebody during Kirby's funeral that her father had shot Kirby, and she also is accused of acting as a lookout during the killing. Both Caitlin and her father were denied bail of any kind, but Karen, strangely, was offered bond at $150,000, which she paid and was released from jail. I don't know why she was offered bond and the others weren't. I wasn't really able to ever find any information about why they felt like she was less of a risk to not be in jail, but there was actually a significant development in this case that happened just a few weeks ago, and that is when Caitlin kind of switched teams. She agreed to testify against her parents in exchange for a plea deal and for her shedding light on this whole alleged family conspiracy. So she's no longer on team Jeffrey and Karen. She's planning to testify against them. In April 2025, just this past month, Caitlin Spence pled guilty to 1 count of accessory to murder after the fact. And as part of that plea agreement, there were a couple of stipulations. She had to agree to provide truthful testimony against her parents, Karen and Jeffrey Spence. And the court accepted the plea and deferred her sentencing. She was released on a $10,000 professional bond, which she paid. And the strict conditions that she had to follow were she has to have electronic monitoring. She has to testify truthfully against her parents, and there is a prohibition on leaving the state without court approval. So she is not allowed to leave the state. Meanwhile, Jeffrey and Karen Spence are still awaiting trial. So as the legal proceedings continue, Kirby's family obviously remains steadfast in their pursuit of justice, and they have taken steps to try to gain custody of Enola as well, just determined to provide her with a loving environment and to preserve the memory of her father. Kirby's mother, Maddie, expressed her anguish and disbelief, saying, quote, "I cannot comprehend it simply because I do not have that kind of evil in my heart," end quote. And I'm right there with her. I cannot comprehend killing someone over any amount of money and taking a father away from his children. The whole situation is just heartbreaking. The community has rallied against the family with social media campaigns and support groups advocating for justice. Overall, I felt like this case was really unreported. I have never heard the story on a true crime podcast before, and I listened to a lot. I actually learned about it from Gavin Fish's investigative YouTube channel, which I've referenced on episodes before. He does a great job diving into these cases. But even with the updates just a few weeks ago, there was very little information that I found about this in my Google searches. And Kirby's family just refuses to let Kirby be forgotten. And I love that about them. They have a Facebook page that is called the Justice for Kirby page, where they post updates and photos of him and memories of him. And they also have been awarding scholarships in Kirby's name. And they recently hosted a scholarship pageant where they were able to award even more scholarships in remembrance of Kirby. While I was looking through this page, I actually found a post that was made on November 30th, 2023, which was exactly 1 year after Kirby's death. And if you remember, that's the same day that Caitlin and her parents were arrested. And the post was actually a poem that was written by Kirby that was found in one of his journals. And it's unclear when the poem was written, who it was written about, or like what was going on in Kirby's life when he wrote it. But it's almost eerie reading it now in hindsight and knowing what happened to him. It feels like it was like written for Caitlin and her parents. So it reads, "It never fails, the good you do will be done unto you. Karma exists, and don't think it's not true. The man who stole from me, someone will take tenfold from you. We know who you are, and so does the man upstairs. And you can stop the wrongdoing and start it from here. Turn yourself in, because they're coming for you anyhow. You got away once, but you're caught now." Isn't that just kind of eerie, knowing everything that happened? The murder of Kirby Carpenter is a stark reminder of how trust can be shattered by those who we hold dear. You just never really know anybody, do you? That's what I'm learning as I'm doing my podcast. Like, you may think you know people, but you really just don't know anybody. As the case unfolds, we are left to ponder the depths of human betrayal and the resilience of those seeking justice. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of She Investigates. If you have any thoughts on this episode or insights, feel free to reach out on our social media platform, She Investigates Podcast on Instagram. And I will be back next week with an all-new episode. Until then, I'll keep snooping so you don't have to. This is She Investigates, signing off.